In 1976, a group of classically trained Broadway performers, a maverick Hollywood director, and a visionary independent producer walked onto a modest soundstage in New York City. They were about to make a musical, a lavish, fully orchestrated, theatrically ambitious musical drawn from one of the most cherished and celebrated stories in the entire history of English literature. And when they were finished, the United States government tried to erase it from existence. This is the story of Alice in Wonderland, 1976. The most audacious, most legally challenged, and most deliberately misunderstood independent film of an entire generation. A production that fused the discipline of the theatrical stage with the creative freedom of the underground cinema movement. A film that terrified institutions, electrified audiences, and ultimately changed the legal landscape of artistic expression in America. And the true story of how it was made has never been fully told, until now. To understand why this film exists and why it matters, you have to first understand the extraordinary world it was born into. It was 1975. America was a nation in the grip of profound exhaustion. The Vietnam War had finally ended, leaving behind a generation that had watched their faith in institutions collapse in slow motion. The Watergate scandal had confirmed what many had long suspected, that the people in power were not always the people to be trusted. And out of that collective disillusionment, something remarkable was happening in the cultural underground. A creative revolution, raw and restless and completely unwilling to follow the rules of the world that had just failed everyone so spectacularly. The streets of New York were alive with a new kind of cinema. Directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese were dismantling the old Hollywood rulebook one frame at a time. Art house theaters were packed every single night of the week. Audiences weren't looking for comfort or reassurance. They were looking for honesty. And into that atmosphere stepped a director named Bud Townsend, a Hollywood professional with years of legitimate industry experience. A man who had directed television episodes and studio features, and who had grown restless with the creative limitations the mainstream imposed. He had a question that the entire establishment refused to ask. What if you took the full ambition and craft of a Broadway production, the choreography, the original orchestration, the theatrical visual grammar, and used it to tell a story that polite, comfortable society had decided could not and should not be told that way? What if you refused to accept that boundary? Townsend's vision was breathtaking in its ambition and uncompromising in its execution. Together with his producing partner Bill Osco, already a significant and respected figure in the independent production landscape, Townsend made a decision that separated this project from everything else being made in the underground cinema circuit at the time. He refused to cut corners. He refused to treat this as a disposable commercial product. He wanted to make a genuine cinematic event, the kind that critics would engage with seriously, that scholars would debate, and that audiences would carry with them long after they left the theater. The screenplay adapted Lewis Carroll's beloved 1865 Victorian fantasy, but reimagined it with a fully adult psychological and philosophical sensibility. In Townsend's Wonderland, nothing was innocent, and everything was intentional. The Mad Hatter was no longer a harmless eccentric. He was a portrait of chaotic authority. The Queen of Hearts was not a cartoonish tyrant. She was a study in the corruption of power. The Cheshire Cat was not a whimsical guide. He was the personification of moral ambiguity itself. Every character, every scene, every exchange of dialogue was constructed as a symbol: desire, freedom, control, rebellion, the psychological terrain of adulthood mapped onto the geography of a dream. The musical score was composed with genuine theatrical ambition, lush, fully orchestrated, and closer in spirit and execution to a Broadway opening night than to anything playing in the independent cinema circuit of the mid-70s. It was the kind of score that announced, unmistakably, that this production took itself and its audience seriously. And then came the casting decision that would define the entire film's legacy. Kristine DeBell was not a product of the underground film world. She was a trained actress, classically disciplined, instinctively alive, and intellectually present in every single scene she occupied. She brought to the role of Alice a quality that is extraordinarily rare and almost impossible to manufacture: genuine emotional intelligence on camera. She didn't perform the character. She inhabited her. Every moment of confusion, every flash of defiance, every quiet beat of recognition, DeBell delivered them with the precision and authenticity of a serious stage performer who had spent years learning how to tell the truth in front of an audience. She was, by every measure that matters, a genuine discovery, and the film knew it. The film premiered in 1976, and the reaction was immediate, electric, and deeply divided. Critics who engaged with it on its own terms, who sat with it, who followed its logic, who allowed its theatrical ambitions to register, were genuinely stunned by its formal sophistication. The musical sequences were inventive and technically accomplished. The production design had a deliberately dreamlike visual grammar that drew serious comparisons to the surrealist theatrical tradition. And DeBell's performance anchored the entire enterprise with a credibility that no amount of critical hostility could dismiss. In New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, audiences lined up around the block night after night. The box office numbers in the first weeks of release defied every projection the independent distribution network had assembled. This was not a film that was going to disappear quietly. And then the other reaction arrived. City councils convened emergency sessions. District attorneys across multiple states opened formal investigations. Theater owners were served with legal notices and cease and desist orders. Religious organizations mobilized with a speed and coordination that the production team had not anticipated. And the word obscenity, that legally treacherous, culturally loaded term that had haunted American cinema since the silent era, the word that had been used for decades to silence artists who dared to push against the boundaries of what the establishment found comfortable, was now being applied to Alice in Wonderland with a ferocity and a political determination that no one on the production team had fully prepared for. For Bud Townsend, it was a crisis that went far beyond the professional. It struck at the very heart of what he believed art was for, what cinema was for, what freedom of creative expression actually meant in a country that had written those freedoms into its founding documents. The battle that was coming would test all of it. What followed became a major legal battle in American independent cinema. Across several states, Alice in Wonderland was targeted with obscenity claims. Film reels were seized, theaters received legal warnings, and distributors faced serious pressure. But director Bud Townsend and producer Bill Osco defended the film as artistic expression inspired by the work of Lewis Carroll. And in an unexpected twist, every attempt to stop the film only made it more famous. Audiences grew curious. Headlines spread the story. By the end of the decade, the film had earned more than $12 million. The attempt to silence it had done the opposite. It had made the film unforgettable. Today, Alice in Wonderland holds a unique place in film history. At its center was the performance of Kristine DeBell, a portrayal that brought intelligence and emotional depth to the role of Alice. For many historians, it remains one of the most memorable performances in 70s independent cinema. Meanwhile, director Bud Townsend continued working with the respective filmmakers who understood the ambition behind the project. And the legal battles surrounding the film helped shape conversations about artistic freedom in American cinema. In 1976, a small group of filmmakers set out to create an ambitious musical. They never expected it to become a national controversy, but that controversy turned the film into something larger, a symbol of artistic risk, cultural change, and creative freedom. And today, Alice in Wonderland remains a fascinating chapter in the history of independent cinema.